Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Julia Becker. I'm the Senior Content Marketing and Account Manager here at FreightWaves. We're happy to present today's webinar in partnership with Parade. Today, you'll be hearing from industry leaders as they discuss how brokers can solve their toughest carrier management challenges using capacity management and TMS. I'll be joined by Matthew Alexander, partner and COO at Steamboat Transportation Group, Mike Masteller, Director of Sales Services at McLeod, and Jesse Taylor, Account Executive at Parade. We'll also have a live Q&A with all of our speakers following our discussion today. But before we get started, I'd like to cover just a couple of quick items. First, if you have any issues during the webinar, you can reach out to our team via that audience chat function in your webinar console, and we'll be in touch to assist you. If you have any questions for our presenters, go ahead and type those into that Q&A box in your console at any point during our webinar today, and we will go through as many questions as we have time for at the end of our event. We'll also be sending a link to the recording of this webinar tomorrow if you'd like to view it on demand or share it with your colleagues. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jesse to kick off today's discussion. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Julia. Hey everyone, welcome to our discussion today. Really excited to talk to a couple of really insightful industry vets here. I've got, as has been already introduced, I have in here Matthew Alexander and Mike Masteller at McLeod and at Steamboat. So to kind of kick things off, I think a great place to start is to do a quick high-level overview of each of these companies, and I'll go ahead and start and talk a little bit about Parade for those not yet fully available, so fully informed. So what we have at Parade is a great platform for 3PLs and brokers of all shapes and sizes to help reuse carriers by getting better data about their carrier networks and figuring out, hey, how can I go and reduce mundane manual tasks, increase efficiencies of the brokerage using data, and help find and book the best carrier for every single load. So that is kind of the overview of Parade, and we'll get a little bit more into it in depth throughout our discussion. But I'd also like to hand it over to Mike to give a brief high-level overview of McLeod, a best-in-class TMS.
Yeah, Mike Masteller. So McLeod Software, complete ERP operations management software platform for both brokers as well as trucking companies. So we offer that full order-to-cash cycle, that full ERP system, and really been focusing on automation and eliminating those redundant tasks and really focusing on building relationships with your TMS instead of that transactional.
Awesome, thank you. Absolutely, building those carrier relationships over focusing on the transactional is going to be a core theme here. And I think that ties in nicely to Steamboat and their philosophy around what it means to be a full service, great brokerage 3PL.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I'm Matthew Alexander. I'm the partner and COO here at Steamboat. We've been a McLeod customer for coming up on 5 years now, and Parade for 2. And the integration between the two of them has been very beneficial on our carrier sales side, and like what Jesse said, pushing reuse and building a solid carrier network.
Awesome, thank you so much. So we have a few really interesting topics for discussion today. There are 3 main industry trends and focuses that are coming up a lot these days, and we want to be able to speak directly to them and how Steamboat has been solving for these. So the first thing that we'll talk in depth about is around what is a 3PL, what is a brokerage's value that they're really providing to their shipper customers. So we'll talk about having a curated network of carriers that you can go and get repeat capacity from, and what does it take to go and get that curated network of carriers. Related to that, we'll talk a little bit about the pitfalls of relying too heavily on one-and-done carriers that you go and find somewhere to cover your one load on a transactional basis, never to use them again. There are a lot of hidden costs associated with that, and I'll be really curious to hear both Matthew and Mike's perspectives on solving for that. And then the third really big thing that we'll talk about is how can we use automation to free up brokerage teams' time to spend more time developing those carrier relationships. This industry is obviously very relationship driven. So if we can spend less time on the mundane manual tasks, how can that help free up your time? So kind of just to jump right in to that main first point, knowing your carriers deeply and knowing where your capacity lies is a great way to go and provide value to your shipper customers. So Matthew, I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit about why it's important to have a strong curated network of carriers? What is the value that you're bringing back to your shippers when you do that versus focusing on the transactional?
Well, when you have a strong curated network, they understand your processes and your expectations. Most customers nowadays are scorecard driven. Your performance is based on tender acceptance, on time percentage, tracking and visibility. And when you have a strong carrier network, they do those things for you. They know what to expect. They know that you require tracking, whether it's macro point, four kites, project 44, whatever it is. When you use those transactional carriers, there's more time, spent explaining those expectations and making sure that they adhere to them. So I think that's one of the big things about having a curated network that is familiar with you.
Great. And I'm curious how your carrier reuse has changed over the last couple of years. How have you, at a high level, been able to improve upon that in the past 2 to 5 years since implementing Parade and integrating with McLeod? I'm curious, do you have any metrics behind that or some general overall, hey, here's where our carrier reuse and our curated network, our ability to tap into that carrier network has increased there?
I don't have specific numbers, but the Parade and McLeod integration has increased our reuse. The algorithm that Parade uses in their targeted email campaign, it's reaching out to carriers as soon as orders hit the board based on historical data, profile preferences. When we build out lanes or enter available equipment, Parade uses that data and stores that data, and it's going to reach out, kind of automate the booking process for you that helps free up your carrier reps.
Yeah, and I'm curious also to hear how your shippers have responded to that. Do they value indeed your ability to go get repeat carriers rather than just finding somebody out there? I'm curious if that's one of your main value propositions that you give to your shippers.
Yeah, price gets you in the door with customers, but service keeps you there. I was just speaking with a customer a couple weeks ago in Detroit, and they pushed how important service was, visibility on their shipments. At this day and age, people want to know where their freight is at all times. And it's an expectation and a requirement that most of them have. So I think carrier reuse and having carriers that, understand our requirements and, each customer's processes, it really helps in performance and maintaining those scorecards and, growing your business that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the really big issues for brokerages right now is going out and winning new shippers can be a little bit tough. There's tons of supply out there, very soft market, but you can retain your existing network of customers, of your shippers, if you can go and systematically, differentiate on service by having I always go back to that curated network of carriers. Mike, exactly. I'm curious if you have any thoughts, and how is McLeod aligned with this goal of curating your network, your private network of carriers?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got various tools within McLeod. A couple key ones that come to mind is we're able to store historic driver information that the carriers are using. Right. So within a carrier, they have multiple drivers, or it could be an independent contractor, but you can actually keep notes on those drivers to where when you do dispatch that carrier, they're going to tell you which driver's on that order. So you just have a historic knowledge of, hey, what's this driver like? What how's that conversation? What's do they have any family members, kids? Just develop that relationship within that contact. We also have some additional tools to really create that relationship with them to where we can keep them rolling through our continuous moves process. So if you do dispatch a carrier and you offer them an order, we're automatically going to display orders at that final destination ahead of time to where we can keep them moving. Again, that driver can then plan his or her hours of service better, ultimately utilizes their hours better, and as well as better customer service because they can now plan ahead of time instead of all of a sudden, hey, this load has to pick up in 2 hours, or hey, it's noon and you got to go to bed because this is an overnight order. It can be kind of risky that way. So those are two major tools that come to mind.
Yeah, you said something really interesting there. Started talking about the personal relationships with carriers, and in a few minutes, I want to dive a lot deeper into that piece because a lot of folks, we lose sight of when we're spending all of our time trying to clear the board. A lot of brokerages lose sight of the fact that carrier sales is sales, and what is sales? You got to have some relationship development in there. You need to be providing service to your carriers and be a trusted partner, giving back to them when they do good things for you. But it's also, like you said, knowing those drivers, knowing the dispatchers, knowing their kids' names on all that good stuff. That is kind of the proactive work that we'll definitely circle back to. That is super interesting. Appreciate the insight there. So when we're talking about, okay, so if the service that you're providing to your shippers is to have excellent service, be able to go buy capacity from your curated network of carriers reliably, consistently doing so, and carrier reuse is a great way to measure that. What does it mean to rely on one and dones? What are some of the pitfalls with that? And that's kind of where a lot of brokerages, especially the ones who are going to be a little bit more reactive right now, who aren't going to be taking that time to develop the carrier relationships. Some of these issues are never going away, no matter what the market is doing. There are going to be those hidden costs associated with reusing or with going with one and done carriers rather than a relationship carrier. So Matthew, I'm curious if you could go into some detail and tell me about a few of the hidden costs that you've seen from going with one and done carriers that you try to avoid, besides maybe just the time that it takes to onboard each individual new carrier, which is obviously a big cost.
Yeah, so the onboarding process, the paperwork exchange, the compliance department, that's a lot of time right there with these transactional carriers. There's also heavier tracking usually involved with them. Like I was talking about earlier, if they don't know your processes or, that you require tracking or updates at certain points, there's, more manpower involved with, the actual operation of the load. A lot of times you run the risk of performance issues because, like you said, it's a one and done. They don't have that relationship with you. They don't care if they, don't follow a procedure and, get you in trouble per se. It doesn't matter to them. They're going to be done with you once they deliver the load. So, there's a risk there. And there's also a lot of time spent on the back end. A lot of the operations don't see the accounting side of it. So if carriers, if they don't understand your accounting process, it usually ties up time on the back end, wastes a lot of time for our, billing clerks. So, the better network you have, the more reuse you're getting out of carriers, you cut down on a lot of that wasted time, because they, understand your expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. That a couple of really interesting things I heard there. So just to clarify, when you're going with a newly onboarded carrier, it sounds almost like you are spending more time basically having to babysit a load.
Exactly.
It might be a good way of putting it. And when you reuse a carrier, they already know your facility. They already know how you like to communicate. You already know how they like to communicate. And so a lot of that stuff doesn't have to be spoken. And so your carrier sales team or your operations team, whoever is running the execution of that load, can be a little bit more hands off while also trusting that the right carrier has been selected, that they want to go and win more capacity from you, or sorry, win more freight from you. And so they have all the incentives to do a good job.
Yeah, and if it's a reuse carrier, odds are they need that load just as much as we need their truck. So, the performance keeps them in the door with us, just as, our performance keeps us in the door with our customers.
And something that I always talk about is that when we're in a really soft market, capacity is not difficult to find. I talk to folks who say, I don't have any trouble finding a truck. But what I would say is that just having a truck isn't really going to cut it anymore, right? Going back to that differentiating on service. So I always say that, good quality capacity is always tight if you have your standards set high enough. Would you agree with that? And to what extent would you disagree?
No, I would definitely agree with that. The stricter your compliance is, the smaller pool of carriers you'll have to choose from. But, I think with the number of carriers that have entered the market over the last 5 years, even having, a strong compliance, checklist, if you want to call it that, you can still have a solid network.
Yeah, absolutely. And another risk that we haven't even really talked about, but is really the talk of the town right now, is this double brokering epidemic that is just huge, and it's spreading and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is another risk. Just the risk, not just the risk of service failures, as you mentioned, but also the risk of straight up fraud. When you go with an in-network carrier that you're reusing, would you say that you're less likely to run into those fraudulent situations?
100%. This fraud ring that's out there, this double brokering ring, they got some pretty savvy tactics, and they'll imitate reputable carriers, and if you don't have your compliance down, they can sneak by. But reuse and going with carriers that are already in your network, I mean, you almost take away completely the risk of that happening.
Yeah, I feel bad for any legitimate freight brokerage that's trying to get started in Glendale, California right now. So Mike, I'm curious if you have any other additional perspectives on how you see like I said, those hidden costs associated with onboarding new carriers. There's the paperwork to just get them onboarded and do compliance checks. I'm curious how you and McLeod are aligned with that. And what's kind of your take on these costs with one and dones?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the biggest struggles is when we talk to prospects, a lot of times it's, hey, how long does it take to onboard a carrier? And typically that's like, say 30 minutes. And then you're waiting on that rate confirmation to get sent back. Well, that clock's ticking, and if that order has to pick up here in a couple hours, all of a sudden you're now picking the phone back up and starting back at square one if they haven't contacted you back. We do have some things built within our system to help, really vet out carriers right off the get-go before you even send them that onboarding packet. So one of those is, carrier insurance monitoring. So once you add an MC or DOT number, you can automatically go and pull their insurance to say, hey, is this a high value load? Are they even qualified to haul this? Do they have the insurance for it? Well, if they don't, then you're not going to waste your time trying to get that information from them. Tracking down paperwork is a big issue. We've got Logic Solutions, which are basically robots that are working in the background that are noticing, like, hey, if this certain customer requires this document from a carrier and they haven't submitted it yet, we'll actually start pinging that carrier. Could be every hour, could be every day, could be every 5 minutes until they submit that paperwork. And the other thing that we'll do is, talking about rate-con statuses, we'll actually display that and color-code it. So if a rate-con was sent and all of a sudden it's been 30 minutes, it's going to appear in yellow. Or if it's within an hour, it's going to appear in red that says, hey, it's been sent, but they haven't even opened it. They haven't received it yet. So it's just those visual cues to really be proactive instead of reactive. So a lot of various tools to assist with that, but it's the biggest struggle when we talk prospects is, hey, we've got 10 orders to cover and we're going to onboard 8 carriers. That's a lot. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of wasted money. It's a little bit of value, but a lot of that's a non-value added task.
Yeah, really interesting actually to transition there, that non-value added task. If there's something that you're doing that could be automated or could be optimized, what is the opportunity cost of spending time on that work? What is the opportunity cost of spending all this time onboarding new carriers, monitoring the rate-con status with all these new carriers you've never worked with before, babysitting the load, to your point earlier, Matthew? Those are all non-value added tasks. I really like that terminology. I'm going to steal it. So I think that like I said, it's a good transition to talk about what if we can start to automate some of these non-value added tasks. Well, first of all, preventing us from having to do them. If we just have to spend less time onboarding new carriers, less time babysitting those loads for those carriers that we don't know very well, but also if we can spend less time finding the right carrier for the load, offering that load to that carrier, spend less time on the phone from all these call-ins from carriers from across your network, even outside of your network. If we can automate, bring in quotes and just make it so that your team is spending a lot less time looking at their board of loads that they have to cover today. And now suddenly, I want to test this idea with you, Matthew, as somebody who's experienced firsthand. Tell me a little bit about your take on automating those tasks and what kind of carrier development tasks have you been able to do more of? And this is circling back to maybe that personal relationship with your carriers or asking them about their preferences, things like that. Maybe you could speak a little bit to automation, optimizing your time better to do more meaningful work.
Yeah. There's a digital transformation in our industry, and I think automation and booking loads at the click of a button is where it's going, and it makes it easier on the carriers as well if they have 20, 30, 40 different trucks that they have to cover or find backhauls for, just move. It frees up the carrier's dispatcher's time as well to be able to automate the load booking process. So by automating that process for the carrier, you're freeing up your carrier sales rep or your broker from having to manually send those rate confirmations to focus on developing relationships that we talked about. It's carrier sales, so you're developing relationships. You're just developing them with carriers as opposed to customers or shippers. So by automating the process for carriers, you free up your carrier sales to really focus on building those networks around customer needs or around your, contracted awards. That's really what you want your carrier sales team doing. And then, the more time they have to have those conversations on, preferred lanes or, needed backhauls for these carriers, it allows them, to get that information into Parade. And then you have Parade, reaching out to these carriers with their dispatch campaign and kind of, working for the carrier sales once they do that work on the front end. It's very beneficial for the carrier reps when every morning Parade's engaging their carrier base saying, hey, you've either ran this load in the past or it's on your preferred lane list and we have it available. If they're able to book and click a button, get that rate confirmation, it frees up carrier sales to, build the relationships and build the lanes around, customers and where we need them. In McLeod and Parade, that integration makes it easy on the, with the book now feature and McLeod having their processes to assign the carrier, assuming they pass all of our, they're qualified on our end. It makes the process so much more smoother on the load booking side.
Yeah, the conversation changes, right? It's that you're not doing that transactional conversation. It's more focused on, hey, where are you growing? How can we help you? Are you adding a new lane? Are you adding new equipment? Are you hauling flatbed now? Are you hauling van? I see that we've been sending you this lane, but you haven't hauled it for us in the last 6 months. Is there an additional lane that we can add to your profile, right? And that integrates with Parade as well. So really, that conversation changes, and you can give them visibility to freight that could be potential to them in 6 months from now from a backhaul standpoint that they may not even be thinking about right now, but you can give them visibility, and they're going to call you instead of others because you've been working with them and being proactive on that.
Yeah, that's somewhere that I think that Parade and McLeod are very much aligned, where if you can stay 2 steps ahead of your carrier and you're already predicting, hey, you've never even told me about this lane that you like, but based on XYZ pattern and how you're engaging with us, we think that this is a load that you'll really particularly like. Here's a button that you can go and book it digitally. And then we partner with McLeod's DFM to go and trigger the rate con to get sent out to that carrier. So once you set up the conditions for some automation, that enables you to go and get better and better carrier engagement, and in turn, better carrier reuse. I always think of this as sort of like a flywheel. Better information on your carriers, learning about your carriers better, leads to better matching, which leads to better carrier engagement. Better carrier engagement leads to better carrier data, and it also frees up your time to go and learn about your carriers even more deeply. So when you're matching based on better data and you're spending more time learning about your carriers, that in turn leads to better carrier engagement. So it's this flywheel effect where the more time that you can spend learning about your carriers and doing those meaningful human-to-human tasks, and the less time you spend just triggering rate cons to get sent out and sending email blasts and things like that, the better you're able to curate that network of carriers. And that's where I think we're aligned. Matthew, I'm curious to see if we're in line in our thinking on that as well.
No, yeah, it 100%. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you.
Cool. That's great to hear. So I think that this is a really good time to transition into one of the last sort of topics to cover, which is, and we've talked about it a lot today, but what specifically is Parade doing and what specifically is McLeod doing? How are these two systems working together? The whole thing that we want to do is help brokers to use their data about their carriers more effectively and also enrich the data about those carriers. So like I was talking about that flywheel, if we can learn about them more automatically in the background, tracking what kind of loads they're moving for you, what kind of signals they're sending us, what kind of emails they're sending to you with capacity. We want to read all of those things and use that information to help brokers to get better matching out to those carriers and then automate. So it's matching, it's getting the loads out in front of the carriers wherever they like to find work, and it's also enabling digital transactions. So and that works together as this great ecosystem between Parade and McLeod. Mike, did you have any other thoughts as we kind of start to wrap here on how these this McLeod and Parade ecosystem work well together to help brokers get better carrier reuse and reduce the one and dones? We've covered a lot, but I'm curious if you have anything to tie it all together from your end.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the newer features that we released that integrates with Parade is, we've got a PNN lane builder that's running in the background. I think you guys have something very similar. So when you onboard a carrier, let's say you onboard them 6 months ago, and they tell you they like these 3 lanes. Well, as they're hauling freight throughout your system, that lane may change, or those preferences may change, and our system's picking up on that, and it's adding it to their profile automatically. So within that lane builder, in addition to, we're going to send Parade those available orders that are getting booked in the system. You've got that big net of carriers that you're going to be able to go out and see who has that preference, who's onboarded within that McLeod system. And the automation from that to assign, cover, come back in McLeod system, move from available to covered, trigger the E-rate confirmation. They sign the E-rate confirmation. They can dispatch themselves. It's really effortless on their part. So you could essentially add in 10 orders, leave for the day, and between Parade and McLeod, those 10 orders could get covered, and rate cons are already signed by the time you get into the next day. Just good alignment and good automation. And like you said, you want to reduce those non-value added tasks, and that's the way to do it.
Thank you so much. I'm fully with you there. Those non-value added tasks, if we can reduce those, you can do more value added tasks. Matthew, I'll turn it over to you once more here. Do you have any final ideas to tie things together, as sounds like a big takeaway here is reducing those non-value added tasks, and that leading to better carrier reuse, reduced one and done dependency, and enabling you to really provide lots of value for your shippers. Anything else to kind of tie everything together here?
Not much to add, just that, the integration between the two systems, like we've talked about, these value added tasks, just it being able to cover loads in the background, send rate confirmations, get signed, and like Mike said, carriers can dispatch themselves. So the integration, allowing this automation has really, opened up our carrier sales team to focus on what we want them to. Building networks around where our customers need them, and ensuring that, we get more reuse out of carriers. I think Parade makes it easy on carriers. The better relationship we have with them, the more likely they are going to interact with this email campaign with preferred loads or historical loads that we might have again. So automating the processes, allowing our carrier sales team to, develop those relationships so that they will, use Parade. It's been, very beneficial.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate both of your insight here. I can talk all day about capacity management, but it means so much more, hundreds of times more, coming from an actual seasoned industry vet who has run the business himself and has been able to improve that business through this technology. So Matthew, Mike, I really appreciate your time, and it's been a fantastic discussion. I think this is a good time to turn it over back to Julia, and I think we may have a few questions in the chat that I'd love to get some answers for.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jesse. Now is definitely going to be our time for Q&A. So folks in the audience, if you haven't already submitted your questions, go ahead and type those in for us in that Q&A box in your console. We've already got a few great questions here, and we're going to roll through as many as we have time for. First question here. Can you talk more about how the Advantage pricing tool works? Jesse, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. Yeah. So Advantage is something that we haven't even really talked about today, but to quickly go over it, what are we doing to help brokers not only find the best capacity in their network and go and buy that, but also figure out what kind of rate advantage can we uncover from the excess capacity in your network? If Parade's uncovered that you have 10 carriers who have 40 available trucks right now on a lane, what does that mean for how you can go and buy compared to the market? And what does that mean for how you can bid compared to the rest of the market? So this is a really important area for brokers, especially as they're looking to win more business. You want to differentiate on service. That's been the big focus here today, but Advantage is an intelligent rating tool to help you also differentiate on rate when possible.
Excellent. Next question here.
Sure.
Do reuse carriers get more predictable revenue?
I would say so, but I think that might be a great question for Matthew.
I would agree with that 100%. Reuse carriers are typically using on contracted freight that you have on a consistent basis, and you typically have a contracted rate or a static rate on with a fluctuating fuel surcharge. So, when you find these reuse carriers, their costs are typically set, with exception to fuel, and, our rates fluctuate the same as theirs do. So yeah, reuse carriers, you can almost always get, a predictable revenue with them, as, you kind of like to maintain the same rates, kind of like a contracted fashion.
Yeah, that predictability is a huge key thing, especially as we talk about the shipper relationship. If we're all talking about relationship building and differentiating on service, one of the services that you can provide is, hey, I know that if I go to Steamboat, they're within a range because they have this really consistent network of carriers.
Yeah. Customers like consistency as well. It helps them plan and forecast.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, next question I've got here. What kind of reporting do you have for reuse carriers versus one and done?
Yeah, reporting is really key, kind of no matter what tech solution you're looking at. That's definitely a question you don't want to go unanswered as you're evaluating platforms. So within Parade, one of the big things that we tout as a value add is increasing your carrier reuse. There are a lot of different metrics and reports within Parade to help you figure out how that's changing over time. So there are a few different ways of measuring that in there. One is your carrier concentration. What percentage of my loads were covered by core carriers who run a lane or run loads for you 4 or more times per month. So that's how we are loosely defining a core carrier. So what percentage of my freight is done by core carriers? Another one is looking at the number of new carriers onboarded each month. That's a number that we generally want to see going down. I mean, every brokerage has a different goal. If you're trying to grow a lot, we're not going to go and say, hey, never onboard new carriers. But generally, brokerages of a certain size would prefer to reuse a carrier rather than onboard a new one because of those costs. So that's another metric. So there are a bunch of different other reports within Parade that you have access to as a Parade customer to go and see, hey, how's my carrier concentration? How's my new carrier onboarded number changed? How has my core carrier reuse changed over time as a result of using McLeod and Parade together to drive deeper carrier relationships?
Great. Next question here. asking, is Parade plus McLeod a type of TMS? Great question. So I would love for you guys maybe to clarify the integration and the difference between each platform.
Yeah, I can talk a bit, and then maybe Mike can handle the tail end. So if you have your freight broker tech stack, your TMS is your system of truth, your system of record. That is the bedrock of the whole thing. Everything depends on that working. And a great TMS can plug and play different point solutions. So what Parade is a capacity management system. Think of it like a system of intelligence that sits on top of Parade, it sits on top of your TMS like McLeod to help you drive additional automation, additional data analytics and things like that. So there's your base of your TMS, and Parade is a system of intelligence that works together with it as an ecosystem. Mike, I'm curious if you think I had that right, or if you'd add anything there.
Yeah, no, it's insane. It's that ecosystem of McLeod, right? So we've got 120 vendor partners, integration points, and that's encompasses that entire ecosystem. Yep.
Fantastic.
Great, thank you both. Next question here. As a broker, what is the best way to interact with these carriers, especially with how everyone sees brokers in the industry at the moment?
I want to take a crack at this, and then I also want to hand it to Matthew. So, a brokerage's reputation fluctuates over time, right? It's a really important job in the industry, connecting loads to carriers. I think that the best way to interact with carriers is first and foremost to know how that carrier likes to communicate and interact. So being as personalized and multi-channeled as you can with carriers and reducing the ask of them can be a great way to get better carrier engagement. That's why, for example, you have to have really good matching to make sure that when you communicate with a carrier, it's going to be worth their while. And you also have to make sure that you're going through multiple channels. So as Matthew talked a little bit about, there's a Parade for carriers private load board that you get, but not all your carriers want to go there. You'll have carriers that just want to go to the public load boards as well. And they might be your core carriers that you use all the time, but those guys live and die on DAT and truck stop. And that's totally fine as well. We want to make sure that we're getting in front of them there too. And then same with these personalized emails, making sure that we're putting the right loads in front of the right carrier at the right time, at the right rates. All of those things are going to be important with having good carrier relationships and making sure that you are adding value to your carriers, especially in a time when rates are super low. Matthew, I'm curious if you have anything to add to that.
No, you hit it on the head. I'd add on about the value add. One of the things that I kind of teach new brokers is when you reach out to a carrier, tell them how you can help them. Like, hey, I see you're based in this area and we have loads that either originate or come back to, your area that, they might benefit you. How can you help them as opposed to always just, hey, do you have a truck available for this load? And then, you take the information that carrier gives you and put it into McLeod and put it into Parade, and then those systems will help, target that carrier on lanes that they would prefer. So, you got to kind of come across and explain to them how you can benefit them.
Thank you. That does really help. I think tying back, add value to your carriers.
I think the last thing they want to get is 100 emails with a bunch of fishing loads, right?
Yeah,
like Matthew was saying, they want to see, hey, give me 5 that are in my lane. Don't give me 50 that might work at some point, but let's have a conversation about it, and let's talk about how we can align and help each other out. And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, we kind of train our Parade users to be more targeted in these lane preferences to a carrier. A carrier is more willing, I think, to look through a list of 10 available loads that are recommended for them as opposed to 100. You know, they just don't have the time. And I'm the same way. If I get a truck list and I see 100 trucks on it, you know, I can eyeball it and see what might be useful, but a more targeted list of a handful of trucks, I think, is more effective. And with how you can build preferences and smart rules and Parade, you can you know, get very granular and, you know, targeting these carriers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, it looks like that is about all the time we have for today. We were right at that 45-minute mark. Thank you to everyone in the audience for tuning in to listen to us today. Of course, Parade, McLeod, and Steamboat for partnering with us. And Matthew, Mike, and Jesse, thank you guys for sharing your fantastic insights with us. If you had a question that was submitted and we weren't able to answer it live, no worries. We'll be happy to follow up with you offline. So continue to go ahead and send in those questions. As I did mention earlier, we'll be sending a link to the recording of this webinar tomorrow if you'd like to view it on demand. And we hope you'll join us again next time for another FreightWaves webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.